Another finger that you have your pie in is
Or another pie I have my finger.
another pie you have your finger in, you could say, is your association with the Roosters. Very prestigious club. Nick Politis runs over there, fellow entrepreneur from Greece as well. Now, what is your association with the Roosters? Are you on the board there? How does that work?
So I've been on the board for nearly 20 years now. On the board of the Roosters. I joined the board back in early 2000.
Are you one of those third-party sponsors that helps out the boys? Or?
No, I don't. I have done it in the past. I don't these days. As a director, we can't. So we've got to be careful that way. But I used to, prior to becoming a director, I used to sponsor Freddie, Brad Fiddler, and I sponsored the State of Origin. I did a lot of sponsorship. It doesn't mean we don't put money into the club. All the directors put money into the club.
You sponsored the State of Origin with Wizard.
Yep.
A while ago.
10 years.
Yeah, wow. And I think you got a bargain on that deal at the time.
Yeah, relatively speaking, compared to today, that's for sure. I got it for $250, $350, and $550 year 1, 2, and 3.
They're usually $1 million plus sponsors.
Well, it ended up being $1 million a year after that. But I mean, I did it for 10 years. It was $1 million plus at one stage.
Do you credit that for putting the Wizard name out there?
It's an interesting thing, sponsorship. If you remember, you won't remember, but I remember a thing called Who's Tommy? There was a campaign on the side of buses back maybe 20 years ago. It said, Who's Tommy? Who is Tommy? And everyone said, who is Tommy? Like, what the hell? Like, it was a big billboard type campaign. And it was about Tommy Hilfiger, the brand. And this was a global thing. And everyone said, who is Tommy? And then everyone started saying, well, who is Tommy? So something like Wizard, who no one knew anything about.
For context, Wizard Home Loans. I'm talking to the kids that may not know who Wizard Home Loans are. They were like an Aussie Home Loans. You were kind of almost a direct competitor. You modelled it off Aussie Home Loans.
No, I sort of did. I come up with branches, and John used to operate through mobile lenders. That was his model. My model was physical branches around Australia and in New Zealand. We're quite big in New Zealand as well. And the difference between Aussie and Wizard is that Aussie was in partnership with Macquarie Bank, and Macquarie Bank funded it. Wizard, we funded all our own stuff. We had our own program that we owned. Slightly different, similar though, in that we both went after the bank market share.
Yep.
But the Wizard name, so it did work for me in the first few years because people said, "Who's that name?" It just said Wizard, not Wizard Home. It just said Wizard across the chest. People say, "Who is that? What the hell?" So people started to inquire. But what you have to do is you have to back it up with it. So if you spend, say, $1 million on sponsorship, you need to spend $2 million on advertising. So I spent a lot of money on advertising. I was lucky because Kerry Pack was my partner. So I spent it on Channel 9. Channel 9 still is the tele-broadcaster for the State of Origin, for rugby league. So I got double dip. So, it's about leverage. I mean, I'm just leverage on leverage.
Do you think jersey sponsors have the same effect nowadays? I feel
No.
like back then, now it's kind of oversaturated as well. Yeah.
Well, there's more sports too now. So there's all the big bash stuff. I mean, there's so many teams with so many sponsors. It's a bit like, 30 years ago there was, Channel 9, Channel 7, ABC, Channel 10. Then all of a sudden Foxtel came along. There's another 90 channels. Every one of them gets diluted.
If you're just going off data, there was more viewership back then on your jersey sponsor than there is now.
It was more concentration of viewers on less channels, of which the channel I was watching had just about every sport viewer because it didn't have as many sports. So tennis wasn't as big, rugby union wasn't as big, soccer wasn't as big. No way soccer. I mean, there was soccer, but it was like Sydney Olympic versus Croatia, the Croatian team, whatever. It wasn't even televised. Everything's televised. I mean, you go on ESPN, you go on Fox Sports. There's about 1 million sports: UFC, boxing, everything. It was much more powerful then.
Yeah, and also going back to your role at the Roosters, there's obviously not reports, but it's kind of known that when they go and sign some of the big names, the Brandon Smiths, the Cooper Cronks,
Tedesco,
they bring them in and say, this can be your future beyond football. What is your role in the talks with signing on big names and selling them a big future at the Roosters and in Sydney?
Well, Brandon Smith's a good example. So in order to get Brandon to join us, I went and took Brandon to lunch in Bondi, at a well-known restaurant there, and took him with one of the other directors, and we sort of said to him, mate, at our club, we like to look after our players beyond rugby league. We like to help you out with a mortgage if you qualify. If you need any advice on where to buy or what to buy, or if you've got a business, we're always available to talk to. And I think the difference between a lot of other clubs and our club is that players get access to us, the directors, whereas a lot of other clubs, the directors disassociate themselves
They keep
with the players.
the football department and the behind the scenes.
The directors are over here, up there somewhere. If you're a player, you got to deal with the coach and the admin staff and the CEO. We don't operate that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't imagine the West Tigers have their directors taking players out to lunch.
No, I'm not having a go at other clubs, but it seems like the Roosters.
Well, that's our model, though.
Yeah.
And we love doing it, though. I mean, we don't do it because we're trying to recruit. I want to meet Brandon Smith.
Keeps it youthful.
He's cool. He's a cool kid, and a really cool kid, and he's a bit wild, but he's cool. And I want him to play for our club, and I want to get a sense of the guy by talking to him. I don't want to sit in a boardroom and someone comes and says, "Oh, this is what Brandon Smith's deal is." I want to meet the dude.
Mm.
Well, that's why as Bulldogs fans, we look at you. You obviously grew up in Punch Bowl, played your junior footy for the Bulldogs. How did you go to the Roosters and not to the Bulldogs? What happened there?
Yeah, where's the affliction there? It's like you're a punch
Well,
bowl
it's
boy.
a big
You're
one.
still...
It's a big one because I left the area when I was 17 and a half. I moved to Bondi because I was going to University of Kensington, and I never went back. So I never moved again back to that area. That's one. So I lived most of my life in east suburbs. But the thing that really, and I got sort of a bit disassociated with footy because I was at uni, I was living in Bondi, I didn't see my friends, I just got disassociated with it a little bit. And then the Super League War started. And I didn't like the fact that Canterbury went with News Limited. I didn't like Canterbury crossing over.
Yeah.
And, mates of mine like Graham Hughes, Peter Moore at the time, who was the chairman of the Bulldogs, the famous Bullfrog, they went with the money. And I thought what they were doing was against tradition. I was living in the suburbs, and I thought, stuff it, I'm going to go with these suburbs. I'm going to go with these because they've remained traditional. And that's the only reason I did that. And then as a result of doing that, I went to games and I started going to meet people in the area. And then Politis just contacted me. He said, being in this sort of Greek community, that would you like to come and join the board because we've got some resignations. And he knew I was, but I was a Roosters fan for about 6-7 years before I joined the board. So mostly the reason I left Canterbury is because I objected to the fact that they went and joined News Limited in the Super League War.
Well, I don't know about you, Nick, but if there's any opportunities at the Roosters, we'll be happy to come across.